Because sometimes people are like, what do you do at these seminars? They don't have a video to show. A lot of you in the room know me. Some of you are neighbors, some are friends from karaoke and whatnot. Some of you are clients, former clients. And it's nice to have everybody show up so there's not just 3 people in here. One time I had 28 people, I couldn't believe it. But I've been doing these, other than the COVID break, pretty much for about 7 or 8 years here in the building. This is kind of how I started my law business. Started as kind of almost a hobby while I had this other job. So I'm sitting here and I've almost been here 11 years. I can't believe it where it's gone. And I remember when I moved in, I was still like running marathons and stuff, and I had dark hair. Ladies were like, "Are you helping your mother move in?" And I'm like, "No, I'm because you know we can be 55 here, and we can be 102. I mean, it's a crazy place. But I do have to tell you something to be proud of for yourselves. I'm starting to really scope the entire Twin Cities area, and there's not many condos like this. There just aren't. They're getting people to sucker in to rent these expensive apartments. They're like, oh, we're active seniors. And I'm like, what's that? They're throwing their money away, in my opinion, on rent. And then there's the co-ops, which I'm not a big fan of. So I think having this condo, we're very lucky. And as I sit in this room, I'm really proud because I'm on the Building and Grounds Committee. And I can't say I did that much of the work, but man, the group has really spearheaded, the backyard, this room, the library. When I moved in 11 years ago, it was pretty rough, so I think we're all pretty proud of where we live. We have great neighbors, and, so I appreciate you showing up. I'm kind of on a mission to help people get these documents done that I'll be talking about. So do you want to start shooting?
I'm shooting.
Okay. All right. So most of you know me. I'm Ron Berglund. As I said, I've lived here for almost 11 years now, and I love the place. And interestingly, I was born only a mile from here, on the other side of St. Peter's. I attended Woodlake Elementary right across the street, so it's like I'm back home again, and I really love it, partly because of the location between Woodlake and Richfield Lake. And David and I are over there almost every day, every night, walking those lakes. I used to run them, and I ran for 47 years, and then ran into a little hip problem, so now I walk. But I love being outside because I'm, in an office job. So I love our location. It's so convenient for everything, and Pizza Luce and the former Bridgmans, so great neighbors. It's a wonderful place. We're really lucky, and we can actually build equity while we live here instead of the people renting the apartments. Because I've seen real life experiences where people can just pay that rent. They think they're only going to be there for a few years, because who knows, right? And one of my buddies' mother was over here across the street for 15 years paying big rent for a crummy place. She passed away with nothing. Her boys had to pay for the funeral. And if she would have been in a condo or a house or whatever, they would have been like on a yacht. So it's a big difference if you own real estate. Now, obviously this is a free seminar, educational, no strings attached. I only ask one thing, and that is that you agree to sign this with your information. A lot of you have already done plans with me, so it's kind of irrelevant, but name, address, email. The last one I did, since COVID, it's been hard to get anybody to allow me to come and do my free seminar. I don't know if they think there's a strings attached or whatever, but so I have a legal assistant, and she sends emails and makes phone calls, and it's like, it's unbelievable. So I went to a place, it was like I was going to Chicago, it was in Shoreview. And I went in there, and it was one of these buildings that they're like, it's fancy. And they're like, hey, $1,500 a month or $1,800 a month. Down the street, there's one that's really fancy for $3,000 something a month to rent an apartment. It's a senior building. And the people were all around 79 or 80. And unfortunately, there were about 12 of them. And I don't think they could quite get what I was talking about, if you know what I mean. So, there's so many different places, and they're all at different levels of cognitive ability, physical ability. And, one thing great about this building, they don't take any measures to help people when they start slipping and sliding. They rely on the children to do that because we're totally independent living. But I think we all have to make our own plan And our families hopefully are looking over our shoulders to say at some point, we might have to move to a different situation. And everybody's going to be different. You're all unique. But I just kind of encourage people, don't wait till the last minute and then panic, because then people make poor decisions. Because sometimes they ask me, what do you think of this place? What do you think of that place? And some of them I've seen, because I have clients that end up moving into these places, and some of them are scary. And some of them are great. So there's a lot to this, and it's so complex. So, as introducing myself, I'm a lot like you guys. We're all slightly different ages and different levels of everything, but I have the same concerns, worries. I procrastinate too. I finally got around to doing some of my own estate planning things after doing them for other people, like the shoemaker's kid. The biggest thing is that most people, we don't learn this stuff in school. So a lot of times we get to a certain age and we're kind of clueless. And one thing I enjoy when people come in and see me for a consultation, because after this seminar, you're always invited to come and meet with me privately and go over your own individual concerns. And sometimes I do documents for people, sometimes I just help them out. I've had estate plans ranging from virtually nothing to I've had a few millionaires into my office. And those are kind of fun because you can do some tricky things. But the simplest plan I had was for a lady who lived here, and she was a really nice old gal. And I met with her, I went up to her condo. This was quite a few years ago, but she's like, I'm renting my condo, and I have a daughter, and I have a bank account, a savings account, a checking account. And I said, piece of cake. You don't even need a will. And she had done her healthcare directive and some of the other things I'll talk about. But I said, go to your bank, because for some reason the banks don't tell you to do this. And you go in there and you say, I finally did it for myself because it's super easy, but the bankers never tell you like it's some secret. You say, I want this account, this checking account, this savings account, my law firm account, my Platinum Plus 1%. I want them all be payable on death. So if you have a notepad, write down POD, payable on death. I don't know why this is some big secret. And then somebody told me that a bank over in Bloomington was like, no, the kids have to be here to sign something. Totally wrong. So, at any rate, who in the room has done this, has gone to the bank and do a POD? You guys are getting gold stars. It's easy, and believe me, I've seen it happen right across the street at Newmark. It works like magic. And because the magic number for personal property, requiring probate or not, and I'll be touching on that as I get into my stories, is a magic number that you might want to write down. It's 75K total. So if someone has a total estate of adding everything together of more than 75,000, you cannot do a simple affidavit of small estate, which I've done for free for a few people in the building just to kind of help them out. It makes me feel good because it takes me 5 minutes. So they take the affidavit of small estate, they bring it to the bank, and they say, here you go, and immediately the banker forks over the money. So, but if it would have been $75,001, oh my gosh, I need probate court letters testamentary or probate court letters of administration. You hit that magic number and it's like, oops. And then people say, well, what if I have this and that, and it adds up to more than 75? You're in trouble. So what you want to do, and I'll be talking about this through my stories, is you want to end up, even now, at your young, spiteful age, you want to have nothing in your own name. So I'll be talking about that. Because that's what triggers a probate. So I'll get into that with my stories. The reason I started to do this, I had this job. I had many legal jobs over the years, but I ended up working for an entrepreneur, and I was like his in-house counsel. With small companies, you wear a lot of hats, and got to the point where I was in my mid-60s, and he quit paying me. I put up with it like being in a bad marriage for a couple of years, and I'm like, what am I doing? So I finally worked my way out of that, and it was horrible. So I found myself in my mid-60s, living here, with a low nut, because it's very reasonable to live here. Nothing fancy, no fancy cars or boats or whatever. And I'm like, what am I going to do at mid-60s? Like, who's going to hire some old attorney that worked for a goofball over in Bloomington? I hung up a shingle, and I started with doing these seminars. And so I got some clients, and I was doing this estate planning, and I do a real estate deal, and putting ads on Craigslist of all things. And I found out I really enjoyed what I was doing. I was having fun. I had a low nut because I wasn't paying for an office, wasn't paying for a secretary, doing my own thing. And it kind of escalated over the years. and became a real, actual kind of a little business. But it was more like a hobby, so now I've given a lot of thought to this, and I've decided I really love what I'm doing. Because the real estate, all these probates and all these estate plans involve real estate, so it goes together like a horse and buggy. And it really makes me feel good when I can help people. And just for one example, there's many. If I can save them having to do a probate and they live here, they've saved over $3,000. And I still made a little bit on the transfer on death deed I'll be talking about, but stuff like that. So it all started with my mother. She was down in Florida, and being an attorney, I can do all this stuff. But when they're in Florida and I'm here, they just did something, and she filled in her health care directive. Down in Florida, they were calling it back then a living will. They keep changing the name of the darn thing, but I think you all know what it is. And it says, if I'm deemed to be terminal, I don't want this and that and the other tube feeding, resuscitation. You make your choices, and then everybody signs it. You have a healthcare agent on there, maybe a backup successor if your healthcare agent is out of town, and they're really important. So my mother did a real wishy-washy one. They never even told me about it. And she said, well, depending on the circumstances, this, that. My dad was like, no. He's like, no messing around. Guess who had the heart attack at age 85? My mother. So they did, the electrodes and brought her back, and I flew down there, and she's on a breathing machine, and it was just, it struck me, it hit me hard. So for a couple days, she's on this machine, and then with the family, my sister was there, and my daughter. It was a really great hospice doctor, and she explained everything, and my brother was there, and my brother's like, oh, we're starving her to death. I said, did you listen to her? But there's a lot to the whole hospice thing that I'm sure at some point, maybe some of you have dealt with family members. It's complicated. So it made me realize how important these documents are, because if my mother would have had a good one, it would have said, let her go the natural way. So that was number one. Number two, a really good friend of mine who also went to Woodlake across the street, and I've hung out with and still do since age 4, his wife came down with a really strange condition called pulmonary fibrosis 12 years ago. Well, it was actually 10 years ago. So it was a rush deal. I had to go over to the University of Minnesota. Of course, I put on my ninja suit, and I could draft these documents and drove over there, and she was still able to sign and understand a healthcare directive and a power of attorney. They intubated her, 30 days went by, and she just finally died. But that avoided the need for him to do an emergency guardianship and saved them thousands of dollars, because guardianships are a nightmare. So just trust me, they are. So I've seen some situations, I'm handling one where a guy, he can't move his arms or legs, he just moves his head, but he stays alive, and he needed a guardian, so I got his nephew, he's from Somalia, appointed. And it's all this red tape, and you go, what is the problem? But that's what you run into with the legal stuff. So that really hit me hard, that man, I can really help people by doing these documents and save them thousands of dollars. The third one was just simply when I got to that magic, I was in my mid-60s, and like, what am I going to do with the rest of my career? Because I ended up with no retirement package. A lot of people have a nice, comfortable retirement. Me, it's just bare bones Social Security. So you got to keep hustling, and as long as you love what you do, why not? So that's what brings me here. So I used to give this seminar. I do tend to jabber. So I'm going to tell 11 short stories. Instead of telling you what's the difference between a will and a trust and powers of attorney and attorney in fact, and people, I guess, hate the legalese. I had one guy sleeping at one of my seminars, so I'm going to see if this is better. And those of you who have been to one of my previous seminars, this will be kind of all new. And I'm going to weave the teaching into my stories. So I hope you like it as much as I do, because a couple of these stories, you can't make it up. You're like, really? Did that happen? And I keep thinking, I come home at night, and my son used to live with me, or, years ago my daughter lived with me, and I'd be like, well, how was your day? I'd be like, you wouldn't believe what happened today, who came into my office. The first one is about another gentleman that went to Woodlake right across the street. And he's a character, and he became an alcoholic, just a character. And he ended up inheriting this, just probably the worst house in Richfield from his parents. It's just a shambles, but it's still worth a lot because, someone will tear it down and make it all cool. It's really close to those $1 million condominiums right across Richfield Lake. And if you've been to Lyndale and 65th, there's some monumental thing going up. It's just been amazing to watch it. Because Richfield is turning into the new Linden Hills, I guess. But this gentleman inherited the house from his mom. And then he falls behind in the real estate taxes, and that's a whole story. But I said, well, you know, I'm a lawyer. I put on my ninja suit and I can help you. Let me do a will so that actually, he could have done a transfer on death deed, but he's such a bozo that he still hasn't cleared things up from when his mother deeded the property to him in her will. So it's like a legal nightmare going on. And I could have helped him, but he's just so weird he didn't do anything. So I said, well, what's going to happen is you're going to pass away, and someone's going to have to handle the probate. And without a will, your house, and it's going to be worth a lot just because someone will tear it down and build something nice, is going to go to your estranged daughter who you don't want to go to, which you tell me. It's going to go to your daughter, not your sister who helped you out along the way. So I'm imagining one of these days he's going to fall down the stairs, break his neck, and his daughter is going to get the house just because she's in the pecking order in Minnesota. As you know, it goes by the blood relation. So the first ones to inherit would be a spouse, then it's children, then parents. So his daughter, who he doesn't want to have his house, is going to get his house. So that's a crazy story. Then I've got a story about a guy named Jerry who has this, he came in, I loved it, when he came in for his consultation, he had a color printout of his family, his new bride and his really pretty 26-year-old daughter and him in front of a really nice house. And he said, I said, well, what do you want to accomplish with your plan? That's how I usually kind of start it. Like, what do you want to do here? What can an attorney do to help you make it the way you want it? Like, you know, Burger King used to say, have it your way. He said, well, you know, my wife is entitled to something. She's my second wife, and I want to be fair with her, but I really want my daughter to have the brunt of my estate. Probably a total of real estate in his portfolio, probably about $2 million. And I said, so when you got married the second go-around, you didn't have her do a prenup. Big mistake. So I said, well, I can do an estate plan, but you need to be aware that in Minnesota, if you're married to someone and you, let's say you have a heart attack, and no matter what you do in your will or if you do a trust or whatever, by virtue of being married, they're entitled to a certain percentage of your estate that gets more and more and more the longer you're married. Anybody know about this? Most people don't. So by the time you hit 15 years, you max out, and she gets half of his entire estate. His daughter gets, you know, what's left. So I was trying, he said, well, that's not reasonable because we had a general person's agreement way back when. And I said, well, now she can do a post-nup, but she really should have an attorney. Actually, you have to for a post-nup, not a prenup, but for the post-nup, both sides have to have lawyers. And then I said, we can show her what she's entitled to, and we can remind her that, you know, she made the deal with you back when you got married 13 years ago that she was going to be reasonable. But now she's being bullheaded, and she's going to get a lawyer, and you know, so this is just one of my stories, like, what happens in this world? And nobody knows this stuff. And even if he did a trust right now, he could do that. But the trust, an irrevocable trust, would cut off his wife's right to get half of his estate. But that won't work unless he survives 2 years from the date of signing the trust. And right now, he's just like not doing anything. So if he had an incident next week, and believe me, some of my clients, they think they're all healthy, and then 2 weeks later, they're like, I need a bypass. You know, so they don't know because they don't go to the doctor. Men are afraid of doctors. So a great story, why don't they see an attorney? The third one, I've got 3 of them that have to do with deeds. And they're quick, short little stories, but they just illustrate how important a deed is. And most people, when they come in for an estate planning session, even in the building here, I say, do you have a copy of your deed? Unfortunately, I know how to get them quick. Now, in some of the outlying counties, it's a little trickier. I think it's like over in Shakopee or whatever, I almost have to have someone drive over to the courthouse. It's crazy how hard it is to get a copy of your own deed. And it's weird that no one has a copy of their deed. Hennepin County, I send $2 by snail mail, and I get it in a couple days. So it's pretty cool if you're in Hennepin County. But you have to know how your deed is made up, because a lot of people don't know. So the first one, this will surprise you. The grantees were, let's say, John and Mary, and they bought a house in Richfield 45 years ago. And the deed said John and Mary, husband and wife. And I've seen so many of these, and I was going to do a TODD, transfer on death deed, so it would avoid the need for probate because the husband had died, I think, three years ago or something. 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I read the deed, and my eyeballs just missed it, and it said husband and wife. And sometimes you have to keep reading, and it sneaked somewhere in there the magic words. Write this down. The magic words are joint tenants with right of survivorship for joint tenant. It did not say that. So without, kind of being in a hurry or whatever, I sent it in Hennepin County. It took about a month. They sent me back a love letter and said, Mrs. needs to do a probate because when it doesn't say joint tenants, Hennepin County, probably the entire state, deems that to mean tenancy in common. That means dad had a 50% interest and mom had a 50% interest. And to transfer dad's 50% tenancy in common interest, you need a probate. So I gave her the sad news. Sorry, the TODD didn't work because whoever did your deed was a bozo, because they always make it out husband, wife, joint tenants. So she's got to bring a probate, and I said, you better hurry because if you wait another year, you'll have to bring the action for determination of descent, which is similar to a probate, but just has all different terminology. And they're kind of a pain because the people out in the counties don't know, they're not very good at them because they're much more rare than a regular probate. So just by a simple little thing, she's going to need a $3,500 probate. Because that's the minimum. And then if you get into like strange things like will contests or one I've got going on for a former resident of the building, which I'll tell you about in a minute, it can be way worse than that. They can drag on and they can kind of a nightmare. So that was misdeed number one. The deed was goofed up. Misdeed number two is another classic. This one is Ole and Lena. And they have a home near the Hub Shopping Center. Literally, it's about a 3-wood from the Hub Shopping Center. It's a little old Richfield house, pretty nice. Well, Ole is now in a nursing home, and Lena was living at home, but she just joined him. It's one of those, they get to a certain age, and it's a judgment call. Are they okay to be home with their alcoholic daughter or not? It's crazy what you run into out there in the world. So I, of course, ordered the deed because I'm doing the documents, the powers of attorney, the TODD, so the avoid probate. The deed comes in and I'm like, holy smoke. Ole had purchased this home before they even got married, like over 50 years ago. And of course, people are oblivious. All these years she's lived there thinking it was her house. She's not on the deed. Now that may just sound like a technicality, but it's a big deal. So right now she does not have a legal ownership in the house, and if the kids were real jerks, they could basically almost kick her out. She can't sell the house. They are what's called the remainder persons, and she is in there on a life estate. So if she would have come to a lawyer, and the lawyer would have said, man, because I'm trying to do this tomorrow, I'm going to drive up to the nursing home with the daughter, hopefully she'll be sober, and I'm going to go in there and see if Ole can, he doesn't have to be of sound and disposing mind. If Ole can give me his autograph, I can notarize it and put Lena's name on there. And then we do the TODD. I've saved them probably $5,000 because these things can be just a mess. So if people would just sometimes see a lawyer, they can see somebody else. They won't hurt my feelings, but just don't procrastinate and let it happen. Now, probably nobody in the building here, we tend to be smarter than the average. A lot of smart people in the building. So that's Ole and Lena. And then one more on the deed. This is misdeed number 3. So there's a family way up north in the Ely area. And mom, I should say grandma, made a deed out. Somebody whispered in her ear. And I don't have time today to get into the 5-year look-back rule and the spend down that is like my advanced seminar, because elder law gets into all that stuff, and someday I'm going to do a seminar just on that. Pixie knows, she studies this stuff. And it's beyond estate planning, it's like elder law, but the cardinal rule is they will pay for your nursing home if you're destitute, but if you have any money at all, you have to spend down to $3,000. You familiar? Anybody heard about this? And then the other thing is if you've given stuff to your kids or what have you, your church, they have a thing in the application for medical assistance. And it says, here's the $64,000 question. In the last 5 years, have you given away or transferred for less than fair market value any property? Yes or no? So I had said to a few people, you do this deed, and then you wait 5 years and 1 day, and then you apply for medical assistance. And the answer to that is no, because it was 5 years and 1 day ago that I deeded my house to my kids. And guess what? It's kind of like when a kid turns the magic age of 18 or whatever, they're out of the jurisdiction of the family court. You know about that, like in divorce cases, custody. The kid's 19, out of the jurisdiction, not a question. You know, they're adults now. Similarly, that house is out of their jurisdiction. And let me tell you, I've been dealing with some of these counties around here, and some of them are coming for you. And it's like they are looking at that house. I've got one in Noka County I've been dealing with. They're looking at it like that's their house. Because they don't want to pay for mom and dad's nursing home. It's $10,000 a month per person. And they're looking at that house like I said it would have been so great to say, well, I found this deed that was notarized more than 5 years ago. They're like, oops, they're not. So isn't it funny how something like that can be so significant? So getting back to the one up in Ely, somebody whispered in mom's ear, like, if you do this deed, 5 years go by and you have to go into a nursing home, it's not in your estate. Question?
It was about the 5 years.
Okay.
That's not changed.
Still there.
Okay.
They keep monkeying with it every so often.
Wasn't it 7 years at
It
one
was a
time?
long time ago.
That's
Yeah.
what I thought.
And the VA, I had a little egg on my face. It was only 1 year for the VA.
Wow.
Wow. A couple of years ago, told a few people about it. And then some lady was like, they had changed it, like, 2 months before. I can't sit here and read this stuff every week. But, all of a sudden the VA now is 2 year look back, which is sure better than 5. So somebody up in Ely had whispered in her ear, and she did a quitclaim deed for a property near Ely. And she did daughter, son, daughter. And all these kids are around late 50s, 60, that range, 65. Well, guess what? She did it as tenants in common. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The brother, the pickle in the middle, had a heart attack. So there's just the 2 daughters now. David, what's the result?
I guess, without a quick claim?
Well, the quitclaim deed said tenants in common. So if one of the 33% owners dies, what do you have to do?
Find out if
Fix
they
it.
have any kids.
That's
Declared
it.
or
You've
not
got to
declared.
probate it,
Okay, probate.
flat out. Whether they have kids or not is irrelevant. So one of the grandsons, these millennials think they know it all. He's like, your attorney's full of it. I said, have him get a second opinion. You absolutely need to probate the deceased brother's estate, or you'll never sell that home. Now, if mom would have made it, or grandma would have made it joint tenants with right of survivorship, the daughters would own it magically without having to lift a finger. So sometimes, and that's why some people, I even heard it today, I'm going to do my own documents. I said, okay, and I'll give you a scalpel too. I just had a couple basal cells on the back of I'm not going to be scraping my leg. You've got to have an expert, you really do, because you can goof up and it can cost thousands. So,
When you say probate, that's a really dumb question, but probate means it goes back to the court and everybody gets to haggle about it?
well, let's stop right there because it's a good question. And I want to make sure everybody takes this down so you know the cardinal rules. Because people always go, what triggers probate? The only time you need to do a probate, let's say that it's me and I pass away. If I own any assets, real estate or personal property, in my own name because I'm single, there's no magic fairy up there that transfers the title to my kids. Only the probate court can do it. So if I don't do like a transfer on death deed to my kids and I have my condo here in my own name, and that's why I really want to ask everybody in the building, come and see me. If the condo's in your own name, I just make out a transfer on death deed, quick, cheap, easy, amazing, and if anything happens to you, it's like an insurance policy. You'll live to be over 100 because now that you've got everything squared away, it's like you buy that thing and you go on the airplane, it'll never crash because you did $1 million policy. But with the TODD, it avoids the need to probate to change the title to the condo. Pixie knows this cold. I know a lot of you that I've met with. It's a great instrument. Now, and I do have some clients that have a cabin in Ely and a condo in Florida, they need what's called a revocable trust, a living trust. But in my opinion, the average person just doesn't need one. And there are attorneys that go around putting on dinners and stuff that that do sell people, and they're beautiful documents. It's just that it's like giving a child a house. They make the trustee the beneficiary of everything. Otherwise, it would be real confusing. So you have to actually inform the company that you've set up a revocable trust and you give them this magic language. So if you ever want me to look at it, I'll take a peek. That stuff can be tricky. Another good quick one. The same gentleman who sadly lost his wife at such a young age, she was only 60, and I rushed over there with those documents. He's in here again. He has a house that's probably worth $400K in South Minneapolis. Free and clear. And he's not in the best of health, and plus he's been drinking like a fish. And I said, man, you better, he thinks, oh, we'll live here forever. It's not up to you. The men in the white coats might come and take you away. And I said, what's going to happen is if you have to go to memory care, it might not be your choice. Each year it's going to cost $100,000.
Oh,
So that house will be gone in 4 years. Then he's got these portfolios of other stuff for probably a couple hundred more. So if he lingers, he could go through $600,000 by being in a nursing home. And I said, the other thing you could do is you could do the double-barreled approach, which I've done for a number of people. And here's what we do. We do a TODD, and we simultaneously do a quitclaim deed. Now, we record the TODD because you have to. It's absolutely necessary. $46, a good investment. But we hold on to the quitclaim deed. It's called a pocket deed. And all it has to be is notarized. It's crazy. It doesn't have to be recorded. So if you have to deliver it to your son or your daughter or your church or whoever, and they put it in their pocket and they just hold on to it, why would you want to use that? Well, if in 5 years, Dad needs to go into memory care, the kids have a choice. And they can look at the cost of having the nursing home go into the home equity for all those years, or they can record the quitclaim deed because it was done more than 5 years ago. And you all know what that means. It's out of the jurisdiction. But they can tear it up. There's only one downside to the quitclaim deed, and this is true about my buddy here. He bought that house so cheap, like $40,000, 35 years ago. And he put a lot into it, a lot of sweat equity and all that, but I don't know how much he kept track of. But you know what he's going to have on that? If he gives it while he's alive, have you guys heard about capital gains tax? He's going to get whacked for long-term capital gains. But even if it's 20%, that's sure better than nothing. Because if it ends up and it gets depleted on being in memory care for 6 years, there goes $600,000. So that's what I call the double-barrel shotgun that I've done for a number of people. Dan?
Doesn't he get one free pass at the capital gains for dwelling in his life?
But you got to remember, he's not getting another house. He's gifting the house to his children. If you make a deed out and you put your children on the deed and the home is worth $1 million, you have given them a gift of $1 million if that's the equity. Get it?
Yeah.
So it's a huge, now gift tax, it's maybe 20%, but sometimes they could lose the whole thing if the person was in a nursing home or memory care for a long time. And with my mother-in-law, she was at 9 Mile Creek. With normal progression, she was in there for independent, and then a couple years later, it was assisted. And at the very end, it was virtually like a nursing home experience. So it was a 9-year swing. Jerry?
What Dan is saying, Dan, the feature you're talking about is an income tax regulation. What he's talking about is the gift tax regulation, separate area.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And it just so happens,
Thank you.
Dan, we have in the audience an experienced IRS guy who's got extensive tax experience for his career. So Jerry's very knowledgeable. So good question.
Thank you, Jerry.
so Ron, there's a lot of people in the building that have put their condo in their children's name, or they have both children's, the child they want to inherit on the deed. And is that a way of
That's
handling?
smarter down.
Okay,
You could
once
do it.
again, Pixie, great question. If when they purchase the condo, they put their name and their parents' name on it, they haven't made a gift.
Right.
So then if the parents are in here for 5 or 10 years, there's not going to be a gift tax. And the one thing that I haven't mentioned that's really important is whenever things transfer via a death, the government gives you a free pass. There is no tax, unless in Minnesota it's more than $3 million, and federally it's more than 11 million. So the one benefit you get is by transferring things through death, you avoid the capital gains tax, and it's not income, it's not a gift, it's just a death transfer. And the rich people make the laws, so that's why that happens. Now I've got my best story yet, as we're getting down to the 1 hour mark, and I don't want to keep anybody, but this one still knocks my socks off. I get a phone call from a young lady, and she says, "Do you probate wills?" And I said, "I sure do. Bring it in, let me look." She says, "Well, I'm a Native American from a Wisconsin tribe, and I lived with this old gal right near Shakopee for 4 years, and sort of took care of her, and we were friends, and she has no family, nobody that I know of, and she wanted me to have everything, and so she made a will." And I'm assuming she's going to bring in a real legitimate will. She brings in a piece of paper, a holographic will. Oh my gosh. There's 13 states that allow them, but not Minnesota. You need witnesses, you need a notary, it has to be in a proper format. So I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, if you only would have, if I could go back in my time machine, go back to January 1st, I would put 2 witnesses in the trunk of my car, drive out there, and give her a legitimate will, and you'd now have a $500,000 portfolio. I would have just had to do a simple probate, like they did for Prince. This poor gal gets nothing. And I said, if you can find relatives, we could bring a probate, but then they would want the money. They'd be, who is this lady, So isn't that a sad one?
Ron, could you say why she had a will? What was wrong with it again?
Minnesota does not allow holographic self-written wills on a sheet of paper. Minnesota has a very specific statute. You've got to have 7 or 8 things. Notary, 2 witnesses, you've got to have all these key provisions, or it's not a legitimate will. So, isn't that, but some states, if you bring in witnesses and say, oh, I recognize the handwriting expert, because it was very clear when the lady wrote it out, I want Martha to have my entire estate, including my 4, and I checked, it was really a legitimate $400,000 home. And then she said, oh, but she's way behind on taxes, and I said, so what? But now, what'll happen? I get this question a lot. Does the home eventually escheat to the state of Minnesota? And that's so rare, but in this case, it probably will. Because if you'd have found some relative, you could have gotten probate. There's also an outfit that for $2,500 will do an internet search for heirs, which probably would have found some people that are, nieces and nephews, and I could put together a hierarchy of, a family tree sort of, and that works in probate court. And bring those kids in, but whether they would bargain with Martha or not, who knows? They'd be like, heck with you, we'll get our own attorney, I don't know what would happen, but it really hit me when I went home. I said, $500,000? Woulda, coulda, if I could go back in a time machine and say, go see a lawyer. Isn't that just crazy? Then I've got a real quick one. Something to be careful of people people in the building. A real nice couple came in and they said, oh, we've got this $100,000 investment. They won't pay us out. And I got on the internet and I'm like, oh, they got scammed. And they said, oh, there was this guy, this con artist guy, and they bought a REIT, a real estate investment trust, high risk, high reward. I went on the internet, saw these Google things of law firms handling a class action. I said, you just lost $100,000. So be really careful dealing with stuff that's kind of off the radar. Deal with legitimate companies only. And that was a real lesson that, hit home with me. Then I have a real quick one about these, I call them the Twisted Sisters. They just didn't know the rules. There's very specific rules when you're dealing with your parents. So they said, well, we're like the Amish. We commingled all our lives and stuff. And so when mom and dad got to that point, dad went in the nursing home and mom was 2 steps from the nursing home. And the sisters were buying stuff and spending money and commingling, using mom and dad's bank accounts, credit cards. It was just a jumble. And Anoka County was coming for them, trying to do, their big platform is financial exploitation of seniors. Bloomington's is DWI. But Anoka, they were coming for them. And they were trying to make it into this big criminal thing. And I was trying to explain that they just have this commingling thing. It was all just peanuts. And they were almost throwing criminal charges at them. But on the other hand, you know, one of the sisters was living in there, and when I saw the pictures, I was just embarrassed because she turned mom and dad's old, it was not a great house, but she turned it into a dump. And I said to the other, there was good sister, and you know, and then the other sister was all depressed and crazy, but you can just get into crazy stuff when you're dealing with seniors because Anoka County was just had their eye on that house and they wanted to get that house, so they threw the daughters out, and then they made the daughters pay for a dumpster. They had like 4 dumpsters to get the junk out of there. What you can run into, it just boggles the mind, but the people don't know the rules. I told the daughters, I said, you've got to treat like an attorney, a fiduciary duty. Mom and dad's money is separate. It can't be commingling. You know, they're living there, and they even have like their 20-something-year-old son and his buddy living in the basement, and she was in there, and I said, they look at that as you're just leeching off your poor, decrepit mother. And then they said, this is no condition for an 80-some-year-old mother to be in there. It was like a squalor condition. But I just try to let everybody know that when you're dealing with that stuff, you know, you've got to be really careful. So anybody you know in your family or whatever, it's good to know. Because nobody teaches us this stuff. We just run into it and we get in trouble. And finally, last but not least, my favorite, my poster child, Prince Rogers Nelson. I've been following his case for 5 years. It has been a 5-year probate. It's just been the most, by far and away, the most expensive, crazy, confusing probate in the state of Minnesota. And it finally pretty much cleared up after 5 years. So the IRS agreed to a value of his whole estate, including like a property in the Kirk's Taco's and the record contracts and all his real estate. He owned 300-some acres near Paisley Park. And they figured out, and the IRS finally agreed, $156 million. So then comes the lawyers, the consultants, the record guys, the taxes, the fees. So after all this happens for 5 years, and I saw some of the legal bills, and they were the downtown snooty law firms, you wouldn't believe how big these legal bills were. $1,000 an hour with all these attorneys in there. Millions. One of the brothers had a legal bill, what did I write there? Of almost $1 million of battling, and he was one of Prince's brothers. I mean, this whole thing was insane. So finally the smoke cleared, and I was thinking it was going to eat up the whole $156 million, but I was wrong. It only ate up $56 million, so there's $100 million left to go to the heirs. But it did eat up over $50 million of costs, fees, and if he'd had a team of really hotshot attorneys, he could have done charitable giving. He could have saved so much on estate tax and avoided all these fees. And I mean, it would have just been a night and day difference. But Prince thought he was never going to die. So, and some people that procrastinate about their estate plans are a little bit the same way. I just have to go, you know, we're all going to get there at some point. We just don't know when. So don't be bashful. Just dive in and do it and get it done. And everybody in the building that's done it, and David, you offered to say a couple quick words. I've been working on David's.
Well, I'll just say a couple of words endorsing Ron as a very compassionate my experience has been I am the worst procrastinator of all. I will put my procrastination next to anybody else's here, so don't try and fight me on that. And Ryan has just been so patient with me, and so it is. I think it's hard to.
Thank you, David.
And Ryan is again is a great guy and a really competent attorney.
He was going to tell you guys that I keep kicking his butt to get done. I put little love notes on his thing by his door, and I'm like, here's all you have to give me, because he's this close to being done. In fact, it was his goal to have it done by tonight's seminar. But what I invite anybody to do is to set up an appointment with me, come and see me, show me your stuff, show me what you've done, what you need, and then there's a little financial sheet. There's a couple extra there that you can fill out. Because that's helpful. The two main things that I start to discuss with people are what's your family situation, and it might even be like you want to give it all to the church. I mean, anything's game. And then secondly, you know, what are the assets? And then what questions do you have? So that's where we do it in an individual, private consultation. usually at my office in Bloomington. It's 7 or 8 minutes away, very convenient. Years ago, I was doing my business as a hobby, and I'd meet people in the library, and sometimes just to save the drive, I'd meet them in the library, although the people here might get mad at me. But yeah, I appreciate everybody coming, and rather than...
And Ron also met with me and my daughter, who at one time was living in Arizona, now she's back in Virginia. She moves like a Chesapeake some days. And she has met with many lawyers because she has a lot more assets than I ever dreamed of having. And she was very impressed with Ron. She found him credible, and we met on a short term. She was going to be leaving on a plane in 5 hours or something, and she goes, well, he won't meet with us, but if he will, I can meet at 11 o'clock after I get done packing or whatever. And there he was, sitting there waiting for us, and she was very impressed. And she operates at a much higher level than I do in terms of professionalism, and reading people is her job, basically.
She's an impressive lady. You've done a good job there, Pixie.
What were you gonna say about the trust?
Yeah, I was just going to say that a trust is about another half-hour lecture.
Okay.
But most people don't need it. But basically, I recommend it if somebody has like multiple real estate, or they have a little bit more of a complex situation where the distributions aren't as clear-cut as just saying, this person's my beneficiary, and this is my backup in case he doesn't survive me. Where you want a little more involvement and if there's quite a bit of assets, sometimes the revocable trust can be a good investment. But I think for the average person, like in this building, they're usually overkill. And rather than, I'd rather have you guys, give me a call privately or come and meet with me. Otherwise, we could be here for another half an hour, and I don't want to impose on your time. But I really appreciate everybody coming. And I hope you learned some stuff. It's really different than sitting up here and giving a lecture about a trust is this, a will is that, a power of attorney. I'm doing it through the stories. Because I keep coming up with these stories. I can't believe it. And sometimes it's like I wish I could go back in a time machine and just fix it. Because you can do so much while the person's still alive. But once they pass away, it's like it's carved in stone and you can't change it. You can't go, oops, goofed up. So feel free to call me, email me, set up an appointment. And once again, some of you can even buy the book if you want to really study this stuff. One of my attorney buddies who's done personal injury his whole career, he forgot everything he knew about trusts and estates. He's like, I read your book in one day. He said, you get a gold star. But you can also learn a lot on my website. If you visit my website, if you grab a card, because it has a lot of blog articles about, like, what do you do at your first appointment and stuff. And then, people like Pixie, who's already had a plan done, and Jerry, a lot of you have already got your documents pretty well done. But I really want to get everybody in this building to do a TODD, because if they have the condo in their own name. Griggs?
Yeah, one more question for you. Let's say you have a POD, but you go in, well, I'll just say, you go into the nursing home in the year 2000. I'll just throw some things out. 2000. But you have a pay on death, POD. But you're in the nursing home for 5 years or 4 years before you die. So does the nursing home have first right to your bank account, or does that POD come into play?
When you apply for medical assistance, it's the Spanish Inquisition. They want to know every asset you have. And then they force you to do, before they'll pay a nickel, they make you spend down to $3,000. It's a nightmare. And then if they find out that you violated the 5-year look-back rule, they penalize you for the amount of time till it eats up that number of months or years since the 5-year. They say, well, oh, he did it 2 years ago, so there's 3 years of look back that we have to have him pay for the nursing home out of his own pocket. So it's like the Spanish Inquisition. So they'll be looking at those. They even make people cash in their life insurance policies for the cash value. They get it all. Oh, crazy. Yeah. But you know what's crazy? If somebody gives it all away more than 5 years ago, out of their jurisdiction. Isn't that crazy how arbitrary that is? So yeah, once again, thanks for showing up. And email me, come set an appointment or whatever. I just wish everybody in this building, they need a TODD. Why would, and some people say, well, you know, because I didn't mention this, but probably most of you know it. If a husband and wife own a condo or a house, if one of them passes, like let's say, unfortunately, this building is 80% women, so usually it's the men that, you know, the man has a heart attack when he's 60, she lives another 35 years, and because they bought it as joint tenants with right of survivorship, Martha can keep living here and do nothing. But the day of reckoning will be when something happens to her. Then it would have to be probated. Or if John and Martha are, you know, I was just a few weeks ago, flew down to Orlando. If, let's say, a husband and wife are flying to Orlando, if the plane crashes and the condo is in their name as joint tenants, who's going to transfer title to Billy, their son? There's no little, it's got to be probated. Unless they have a TODD or a trust. So that's probably, knowing that and knowing about the PODs at the bank, you know, that's some real value you're getting from this seminar. If you didn't know it already, a lot of you do, I know. But I wish everybody in the building, God, I could save them a lot of money, because probates are a minimum of $3,500 now. You just got to jump through 37 hoops.
Your website. Can you give us your website?
I'm going to pass it on my business cards. It's all on here.
Good.
Let me just pass it. So you can visit my website. It's got a lot of free blog articles on there that I was writing to myself. But yeah, thanks again for coming in, everybody. It was, I hope everybody had some snacks. Help yourself. I want to carry back all that stuff. So thanks again.